Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on authentically connecting with women investors. We are thrilled to have Jean Dunn, who has earned the Certified Financial Professional credential, to talk to us about this topic. It's something that she does fairly often, I believe, for T.Rowe Price, where she is a vice president. And we thank her for doing this for us today. And before we let her start talking, we've got a couple of other people to thank. First of all, we need to thank all of our annual sponsors, the firms you see on the screen, which includes T.Rowe Price. They've been really good partners, like so many of our other sponsors this year, in providing thought leadership and excellent speakers and folks who can help dig into important topics and advance your professional learning. So we thank T.Rowe Price and all of the other firms you see on the screen here. We also need to thank our good friends at CFA Institute. They generously started providing a Zoom meetings license so that we can continue to do wonderful professional learning events like this throughout the pandemic. So we always want to give them a shout out as we start these webinars. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Mark Salter. I'm the Executive Director for CFA Society Minnesota. I will get out of the way here in just a minute. So Jean, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can start sharing yours. And as she does that, just wanted to let you guys know, housekeeping today, ground rules. There are no ground rules. No, it's not like Fight Club. We do have rules. We are going to ask you to submit your questions in the chat function today, and we will be handling those as needed throughout the session. We also have a couple of polls built into today's session as well. So I will get out of the way. Jean will tell me when to launch the poll, and we will all learn something about authentically connecting with women investors. Jean, please take it away, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark, and I want to thank all of you for attending today. I'm really excited to share some of the insights that T.Rowe Price has created based on some proprietary research we did with women investors. We actually did an 8-hour workshop with a group of women investors, all about how they work with their financial professionals and how they relate to money and finances. You know, I've been in the industry over 20 years, and usually when I meet a woman, she'll say, "Oh, that's really interesting. You know, I need to learn more about finances." And then she politely changes the subject. It's amazing how much gender norms can impact our connection with our money and our investments. And I'm going to get into that today. But before we begin, as Mark mentioned, we have a couple polls. I want to make sure that this is as valuable and engage you as much as possible. So if we can start the first poll, it's just going to be a temperature check on perhaps your experience with working with women investors, how much you focus on working with women investors. So you can see the first poll is, how much do you emphasize the unique financial issues women face when marketing your practice? You could be a specialist, you could maybe spend some time, or perhaps you don't market yourself as a specialist on women's financial issues. So we'll give you guys a few moments to submit the answers, and it'll be great to get the results, and this can help me tailor our presentation to you today. A couple quick other things I just want to share with you. When we did this research, we conducted this proprietary research on women investors. We recognize women aren't one monolithic group, right? And one of the key things that we think is very interesting is looking at women's role with regards to investments and finances in the household that they live in. So if you think about it, one, you could be a household CFO, right? That primary decision maker responsible for investment and long-term financial planning decisions for the household. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle. You could share your investment decision-making responsibilities with your partner. And then the third group that we looked at were women that said they delegated the investment decision-making roles to their partners. And what was really interesting in our research is individuals had very different expectations of their financial professional based on which role they played in that household. So I think that's given you guys enough time. If Mark, you could show the results of the first poll, let's take a quick look. So it looks like 43% of you say you spend some time marketing on women's financial issues. Only about 14% say that you're a specialist, and 43% say you don't market yourself as a specialist as women's financial issues. It's pretty typical. Thank you guys for completing the poll. And what I'll share with you is, women's wealth has really accelerated over the last few years, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes, and why it may be helpful for you to think about marketing yourself to women investors. But before we get into that, let's just take a step back and look at women versus men. So this is kind of a fun example. This is the top car brands purchased by men, and you can see on the top car brands purchased by men, we've got really high percentages. So 93% of individuals that buy a Ferrari are men, right? And you can see a theme, right, on the number of cars that are underneath that. We see some fast, maybe European sports cars, a lot of performance, and then you look at the top car brands purchased by women. The percentages aren't as concentrated, right? But you see a very different story, right? Dependability, reliability, safety, and security. Very different picture. I think it's important to acknowledge, gender norms can play a huge role in what kind of car we drive, how we invest. And one of those key influencers is what individuals value. Gartner does some independent research. They look at what Americans value most, and it turns out that women value security much more than men on a 100-point scale. So you rank the top 100 things that you value. Security actually ranks 29 points higher than men for women. So women value security much more than men. Security obviously can mean a lot of things. It can mean where you live, where you send your children to school, what kind of car you buy. But when we're talking about investments, the need for security can often come up when we have those risk tolerance conversations with our clients. And I think it's really important to recognize women having, valuing security more than men, and making sure that you're meeting your clients' security needs, whether they're men or women. There was a separate study done recently on women investors. This isn't part of our research, it's a third-party study, but it shared that women actually have a lot of reservations and concerns with their financial professional, their financial plan, but at the same time, they're reluctant to share those concerns. You have to draw them out of, draw those concerns out. So I think that's important to recognize as you're working with your clients. And then even taking a step further, putting another layer on this, enhanced value that women place on security, is that the words that we use as financial professionals, oftentimes can mean something different to us than they mean to our clients. There's this term called the curse of knowledge. And simply stated, it just means that, any subject matter expert in any area of expertise, develops their own language that can often mean different things to other subject matter experts than they do to the general public. And the word risk is a great example. Oftentimes when as a financial professional, a subject matter expert in investments, the word risk is, a technical term. It's about the volatility of returns over time. But to people that don't work in the financial industry, the word risk actually the word risk gets emotional reactions from individuals, and those emotions differ based on gender. So to men who don't work in the financial services industry, the word risk is a positive term. Risk is I'm going to go out and feed my family. Risk is necessary for survival. But to women who don't work in the financial services industry, the word risk actually has a negative connotation. Risk is something that you do that's bad that may or may not result in a negative outcome. Risk is not wearing your seatbelt. Risk is maybe purchasing a Ferrari, right? Risk is not putting your children in a car seat. So recognize when you're asking a woman what her risk tolerance is, she may be hearing something very different than what you intended. And in fact, I was speaking with a group of women investors, and I shared the story of the word risk. And one woman actually raised her hand up and she said, oh my gosh, she goes, I need to have a conversation with my financial professional. She said, I still remember having that conversation with him a few years ago. And when he asked me what my risk tolerance was, in my mind, I was thinking, what's my tolerance for jumping off a cliff? So, wow. So again, recognizing gender norms can actually have a tremendous impact on the conversations that you're having with clients and what they're experiencing versus what you're intending. So how do you deal with that? I'll give you a couple of examples. So one financial professional that I was speaking with, she said, you know what, Jean, to me, this isn't about asset allocation, what you're talking about, this conversation about risk. Let's set that aside. I can create a complex investment strategy as I wish, but another key part of my job is simplifying those complex concepts in ways that my clients can understand. And she said, so when I'm talking to clients about risk, I actually talk about 3 different buckets. I have a me bucket. And she says, the me bucket answers the question, what does it take for you to feel safe and secure financially? And all of us, on this call, and potentially every client that you have may answer that question a little bit differently. And if you're working with a couple, not only is that great information for you to ask that question of both partners and hear their answers, oftentimes that can be, a moment of learning for those partners, because many times, individuals don't talk about finances, their financial attitudes and beliefs with their family members. So she says, once you've filled up that me bucket, what does it take for you to feel safe and secure financially? She said, then we talk about a we bucket. The we bucket is those shared goals and objectives that oftentimes, require a long-term investment plan. The third bucket is that legacy bucket, gifts to charity or to the next generation. But just the act of separating those 3 different buckets out in her client's mind, I'm not suggesting she's separating the assets, it's just a framing exercise. She said, it actually gives my clients a sense of peace. She said, one of my clients actually calls that me bucket her security blanket. And in times of uncertainty, like we're in right now, they go back and they say, hey, remember, we've got you covered in terms of what it takes for you to feel safe and secure financially. And in that bucket, it can be cash and cash equivalent securities. It could be insurance. It can be real estate. I recognize real estate's an illiquid asset, but the answer is a personal one, and it's about meeting your personal security needs. Okay, so let's move on to why we're talking about women, in the first place. And what I think is really interesting is just to take a step back and really think about the tremendous changes that women have had, out in and outside of the home and in and outside of the workplace just in the last 100 years. So I'm not going to be able to say this much longer. This is the end of 2020, but this year, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And for those of you that aren't constitutional scholars, the 19th Amendment was, guaranteed women's right to vote. Now, I do want to acknowledge, women of color really didn't get that right to vote until much later into the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But 100 years ago was the first time any woman, had the right to vote in the United States. So before that time, women literally did not have a voice outside the home. You fast forward to the 1950s, and we started to see tremendous change in women in the workplace. Early in the 1950s, only about a third of women worked outside the home. You fast forward to today, that number is much greater. And in fact, 40% of households in the United States acknowledge that a woman is the primary earner in that household. So women have gone to the majority of women not working outside the home to almost 40% being the primary breadwinner of households. But what's really interesting, so as obviously as you work outside the home, you're getting a paycheck, you're having financial power, but women's ability to make financial decisions actually lagged behind a couple decades. It wasn't until 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed. That act was a piece of legislation that guaranteed that women and people of color could not be discriminated on credit based on gender or race. So from a practical stance, before 1974, just 46 years ago, right? This wasn't that long ago. Women couldn't open a credit card, get a checking account, apply for a loan, or get a mortgage without a man's signature. Women could not make autonomous financial decisions. So think about the families and the women that you're working with. If you're working with baby boomer women or women that are older, are from prior generations to baby boomers, you're working with women who were entering adulthood. So the first baby boomers, started to be in their 20s in the 60s. So many of them maybe had a full decade of adulthood without the ability to make autonomous financial decisions. So why is that important now, 46 years later? You might be thinking to yourself, hey, times are changing, Jean. Well, I'll share with you, there was an academic study done in 2018, and it looked at financial decision-making roles in the household. Because we all know in every household, there's a division of duties, right? Both partners don't take out the trash. We divide and conquer. And when it comes to finances and investing, this academic study found that usually very early on in a relationship, one partner becomes that household CFO, that primary decision maker for investments and long-term financial planning for the household. Oftentimes, the other partner is in charge of the day-to-day finances, paying the bills. And what I thought was really interesting is once those roles have been established in a relationship, they don't change unless, there's a huge life change, like obviously a divorce or one spouse passing. So just think about that, for the implications of that. So you could have clients, they entered adulthood in the 60s. They couldn't make autonomous financial decisions, so they deferred that to their partner. And maybe 46 years later, they're still in that same role because, again, the academic study said once those decisions have been set, they usually don't change. I think it's important context because oftentimes when I'm talking to financial professionals, many times they'll come up to me and they'll say, hey, I have a great relationship with the CFO. It happens to be a man. I've been really struggling to connect with many of my older clients who happen to be women. And I do want to acknowledge, I'm making some generalizations. There are certainly exceptions here. But for that scenario that I just shared with you, just understanding, I think the history behind it is helpful. And going forward in these next few slides, I'm going to give you some really concrete ideas for you to connect with women who perhaps haven't been that household CFO, maybe have felt alienated by the financial services industry. Many women do. Let's face it, it's an industry that was created by men for men many, many years ago. And I'm not necessarily suggesting there's these tremendous amount of changes that you need to make, but I think there's some small adjustments that you can make to better connect with women clients. And as we can see, 2016 was the first year women actually controlled more personal wealth than men. We see this trend continuing. It's going to be accelerated by the great wealth transfer. So understanding the needs of your women clients, and it to me is an underserved audience, and it can actually potentially gain you prospects, women prospects over time. The last thing I just wanted to share about that academic study about the decision-making roles in the household. One important point is, once a decision has been made, who's the household CFO and who's not, usually at the time the decision is made, both partners have relatively equal levels of financial literacy. The household CFO, after they become the household CFO, their financial literacy gradually climbs over time. The partner that isn't the household CFO, their financial literacy plateaus and starts to decline over time. And logically, this makes sense. The household CFO is spending time on it. But again, it can have huge implications for how you're working with your clients and perhaps why you've struggled potentially to connect with some of your women clients. Okay. And unfortunately, we're still seeing a household CFO gap. So although it's certainly understandable, and I've explained to you why many baby boomer women and older haven't been household CFOs, at T.Rowe Price, we do an annual retirement savings and spending study. And we asked the individuals in the study, what do you consider yourself to be? And you can see 52% of men consider themselves the household CFO, only 32% of women. And we looked at this in different generations, and the numbers didn't change. So essentially, the same percentage of millennial women consider themselves household CFO as baby boomer women and older. So there's this huge gap, but I think there's some things that we can do to close that. At the same time that women value secure, and actually, I want to pause right there. I forgot. I got so excited. We have a second poll. So if Mark could post the second poll, I think this would be a great insight. So we got the first one up. Yeah, and we'll get the second one up in just a second. And I have to tell you, there's a reason I'm not doing the poll. So I appreciate Mark's expertise where I have none in terms of Zoom polls. So would love to see, well, and you know what? I did this before. You already know the answer. What percentage of women in the United States consider themselves a household CFO? Again, this is why I'm not in charge of polling. I was going to ask you this before this slide to see if you thought it would be about 32%. So let's go ahead and close that poll, and I will make sure I will do the second one at the appropriate time. My apologies. And obviously, you guys are quick learners. It's only about a third of women considering themselves the household CFO. Wow, so sorry about that. Okay, so just as women value security much more than men, women in that same research that Gartner does, again, looking at what Americans value every year, women value trust. And consequently, it's the same higher rank. It's 29 ranks higher than men. Women value trust more than men. As I just shared a few moments ago, there's a lot of distrust in the financial industry. Women have a lot of distrust in the financial industry at large. And so I think it's important for us to think about how we can earn the trust of our women clients. But I don't think it's fair for me just to say that statement without actually giving you some concrete ideas. And so when we broke down trust, we felt like there were two elements, again, based on the research that we heard, that 8-hour workshop with these women clients. We heard a lot of opportunities with regards to learning. And that's you learning more about your women clients, but also giving those women clients opportunities to learn about finance and investing, in an empowering way. And we'll talk about that. And then the second element of trust, we think, is communication. And let's dive into that second one, communication, because I think this is really interesting. So regardless of the role that the individuals in our research played, whether they're the household CFO, they shared that investment decision making, or they delegated the investment decision to their partner, all three groups actually said there were some concerns and some gaps that they had around communication with their financial professionals. And this aligns, I think, with that other study that I shared with you. There's a lot of concerns, that third-party research, there was a lot of concerns with women, but they're reluctant to share them with your financial professional. So if you're thinking to yourself right now, well, I don't think I've heard any concerns, that's very normal. That's what we would expect. But you got to figure out how you can uncover those concerns and address them. And the good news is our research addressed two, I think, very easily addressable communication concerns. The first one, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is unique to gender, but it was something we heard in our research, and I think it's important to share with you. One big concern was, when I reach out to my financial professional, I don't know when I should expect to hear back from them. And to me, this relates much more to a shift in digital interactions in our economy. Many brands, have immediately respond to customers online. And I do want to reassure you, none of our women clients said they expected an immediate response. They just said, I'm not sure when to expect it. And so I kind of feel like I'm just waiting, and I don't know if I should check up on them. So here's a simple solution to that. Every time you share your email or your phone number, whether it's in one-on-one communications, your email signature, whether it's on your website or social media, perhaps you add a sentence that gives your clients and prospects a reasonable expectation of when you'll get back to them if they reach out proactively to you. So, you could say, hey, I'm working with clients most of the time, but you can expect a response in 24 hours. So seems like a really basic, easy thing, right? But I wouldn't share it with you if the vast majority of our individuals in our research had said it was a concern. So that's one, is setting communication expectations. The second communication issue, and I think that we've seen this kind of verified or duplicated in other third-party research about women investors, is there's this concern that their concerns are not being listened to. And there can be a couple of dynamics at work, right? We know more men identify as household CFOs than women. Household CFOs tend to talk more to their financial professional. They ask more questions. So unintentionally, you may be spending less time on the other partner. Even if that's not your intention, the other partner notices that. So that's one thing to think about, is how can you make sure you're having interactions with both partners? And another thing that we heard specifically is from the women in our research, they said, we'll be talking to our financial professional. We'll agree to A and B, and maybe I get my statement, or the next time we talk, C is what they think was decided upon. So make sure whenever you're making decisions, there's a couple ways that you can make sure, all parties are aligned. One is when one of your clients says, hey, I want to do A and B, you immediately repeat it back to them for clarity. Okay, so I heard you want to do A and B. Did I get that right? And that's an easy way to, nip any miscommunications in the bud, right? Before it gets to be a bigger issue. The other thing that you could do is, just provide a written summary anytime a decision's been made, maybe via email or other communications, again, so that intentions are aligned. So the communication, to me, very basic things, but they were expressed as issues of dissatisfaction. So we thought it was important to share it with you. Now let's get into learning. I think learning is, so important. And again, this is a two-way street. So how can you learn more about how you can better serve your women clients? And then how can they learn? How can you give them opportunities to learn more about investing? So this first one, I think, is a really interesting way for you to connect with your clients in this virtual environment. And there's this old, wisdom that is, whenever you're trying to influence someone or try to work with someone that you don't necessarily have a great relationship with, you ask their advice, right? So one option that you might want to think about is doing a virtual feedback session with potentially some of your top women clients or even potentially prospects. Now, what would you do in this virtual feedback session? You could ask this group of women, specific ways that potentially you could serve them better. Now, at T.Rowe Price, we created what we're calling a client advisory board startup kit that takes you step by step through this process. Now, and recognize I didn't suggest that you create a client advisory board of your top women clients. You certainly could do that. That could be a lot of work. One way to dip your toe in the water is to create a one-time virtual feedback session. And so the startup kit actually helps you determine, how many people you might invite. What would that invitation or even that call out to that client or prospect look like? How would you frame up the session? And then once you had the session, what topics would you bring up? And we actually, in our startup kit, we suggest some of the topics that were issues of dissatisfaction, based on our research that you could tee up and ask your clients advice on. And then we also suggest ways to effectively collect feedback. I know we've all been in a feedback session where at the end of the session you say, I wish I had that hour of my life back, right? It can be difficult, especially in in-person environments, if you have like that loudest voice in the room to effectively gather feedback from all participants. That's actually the beauty of virtual engagement. So if you think about virtual engagements like Zoom or other platforms, they have built-in feedback mechanisms like chat, and there's even some other options where all the participants in the meeting can share feedback anonymously. And I think, again, that's important because we know women are reluctant to share areas of dissatisfaction with their financial professional. And the other cool thing is in a virtual feedback session, all the participants can vote up those best ideas. And then last but not least, after you conducted the virtual feedback session, we have samples of, how you determine, maybe you got a lot of good ideas. How can you determine which ones are feasible, which ones are going to have the biggest impact? So we take you through that process and tell you how you can reach out to that group. Now let's just think about that for a second. So we know women as a cohort, many of them feel alienated by the financial industry. Many of them don't identify as the household CFO. You proactively reaching out to a group of women saying, listen, you are important to my practice. I want to figure out how I can serve women better. Signals to them, how important they are to you, that you're willing to listen, and most importantly, change. Because I think that's what's going to have to be, that's what we're going to have to do to tip that third of women to get more women involved in their financial decisions is our industry, I think, is going to have to make some small changes to accommodate the needs and the expectations of women clients. And the last thing I'll share with you is, the ask of your clients is much less. So rather than if you were going to have an in-person meeting, rather than asking a group of your women clients to spend a night away from their family, you're essentially saying, hey, can we get on a Zoom call for 30 minutes? So it's a smaller ask for your clients as well. And then in terms of learning opportunities, we have a couple of different learning opportunities for women. The first one is a client seminar, and it's targeted to the 2/3 of women who don't identify as the household CFOs. Guess what? A market update isn't going to work for those women who feel a little bit alienated by the financial industry. And it's really focused on helping, number one, women start to understand their attitudes and beliefs about money. We all have our own attitudes and beliefs about money. These are certainly shaped by our experiences and our gender. And for women to become, and if you look at a lot of gender norms, money is an impolite subject for many women. That's a typical gender norm. It's not something that's necessarily discussed. And so for women to start to understand their attitudes and beliefs about money, they can actually, become more aware of their choices going forward. And we end with, focusing on that vision. Connecting your personal vision with your finances, to me, is a critical element that we haven't done a great job for, because, your financial plan isn't about numbers. It's about you. It's about your life, your goals, and your dreams. It's going to help you achieve your dreams. And so this seminar is really different from what women have typically experienced versus, a traditional market update or retirement income seminar. Then the second opportunity to help women learn is called the Women's Money Mentorship Program. And to me, this is really a really cool program. It is developed, so at T.Rowe Price, we focus on financial literacy for young people. We recognize there's this huge gap in terms of, educational opportunities for our young people around financial literacy. It isn't embedded in our current educational system. And so we partnered with Scholastic to develop a series of content, financial literacy lessons for young people. And so we packaged these up into a series of 12 lessons that we're specifically encouraging women to become money mentors to a young person in their life. Maybe it's a child, a grandchild, a niece, or a nephew, because we know women are acutely focused on the next generation's financial success. They know there's this gap. And to us, this is an empowering way for women to become more involved and learn more about finances and investing, because we all know when you're teaching someone, you're learning something as well. And this is also a unique way to engage with your clients during this, during the pandemic, because we've actually had a lot of women who have children or grandchildren, doing school remotely. They're looking for additional content and things to share with those children or grandchildren. So this is a great series of lessons that you could share. We also have a series of social media posts. So again, kind of signaling to the world that you're focused on women's financial issues and you're a supporter. You could use this, supplement this. It's basically 12 posts that you could put in your social media program if you do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the third poll. So if Mark could help me out, we're going to go ahead and do the third poll. And while he's putting that up, we're going to go ahead and transition. So I've shared with you some general observations from our research, and we're going to transition to some specific observations based on women, who are self-identifying as the household CFO, the shared decision maker, or the delegator. And so here's this last question. So when you're working with women clients who delegate the role of household CFO to their partner, would love to hear your responses. Is that something you struggle to connect and engage with? Sometimes you connect with, or you strongly connect with the women who delegate the household CFO to their partner? So as you're filling out that survey, I'm gonna move on to the household CFO, and just to keep things moving, and just share with you, we've created basically 3 personas. Persona is not intended to be a specific individual. I think that's important. This is a collection of insights around people that, women that are household CFOs, and we'll share what those insights are with you. But before we get into Carla the Captain, who's that household CFO, would love to see your responses to when you were working with women clients. So we can close the survey out and see what we've got. That would be great. Okay, so we see a little bit of struggling to connect with, engage, but the majority of answers sometimes connect, but looking for opportunities to better engage. That's great. Thank you guys so much for responding, and I'll share with you a couple of ideas. Obviously, the ideas that I just shared, and I'll give you a couple other ideas specifically in your conversations with your clients on how you can engage with those women that are either the shared decision maker or the delegators. So we've got Carla. Carla's the household CFO. one of the things I think is interesting is the women, to me, that are household CFOs have essentially adapted to our industry as it is right now. So to me, they require the least change. You know, Carla is like any household CFO, regardless of gender. She's very focused on, you know, investments and financial decisions. She actually enjoys talking about investments. And this is a big dynamic. You know, we see a certain part of the population that's like fascinated by financial markets. Household CFOs are usually in that group. They enjoy talking about investing in markets. Talking to you is an enjoyable experience for them versus individuals that feel more obligated to talk about investments and financial planning. And we'll get into that with the other personas. But Carla enjoys talking to you. You know, what's really interesting is if you look at demographics today, there's about a third of America is single. So one person in the household, and we're seeing a larger preponderance of, you know, single women who are those household CFOs, whether they're single or they have a partner. Know that Carla, you know, takes the weight of, you know, the financial responsibility of the household very seriously. So this is, to her, you know, something she enjoys, but it's also something that she's very focused on succeeding and recognizes its importance. So then we'll move on to Nicole. Nicole shares the investment decision making with her partner. Nicole, so if you think about the conversations you're having with Carla, a lot could be about investments and finance. Nicole's less interested in those conversations. She's more focused on developing a personal relationship with you. She wants to know that you care about her and her family. We actually had someone in the group of Nicole's who said that she, in 2008, the crisis of 2008, she was getting concerned about her financial plan and her finances, her investments. And she reached out to her financial advisor, which was something that she didn't normally do, right? She shares the decision, but she said this wasn't something she normally did. She got like an out of office message from her financial professional that said, hey, I'm on safari for 3 weeks. There was no other person in that out of office message that Nicole could reach out to. There was no contact. She didn't hear back from her financial professional until about 3 weeks. Guess who's no longer Nicole's financial professional? You know, Nicole maybe doesn't spend a lot of time interacting with you, but she wants to know that she is important to you and that you care about her personally. Now, I'm not suggesting you never take 3 weeks vacation, but again, it goes back to that communication. Maybe making sure these clients know in advance, or at least giving them someone else that they can contact when you're not available. And then the last persona is Paula. Paula is a passenger. Paula delegates the investment decision Paula delegates the investment decisions to her partner. So I talked about how Carla is really fascinated by financial markets. On the other end of the extreme, Paula knows investments and financial planning is important, but she views it more as an obligation. So talking to you is kind of like going to the dentist for Paula. She'll do it. She knows it's important, but it's not first on her list to do. Paula also has some misperceptions of you and your knowledge and your abilities, I would say largely based on her financial literacy, which, as we know, the non-household CFOs, financial literacy tends to decline over time. So one of the things I thought was really interesting in the Paula group, and to some extent in Nicole's group as well, is Paula said to us, the group that comprised of Paula said to us, you know, when the markets go down, I know my financial professional knew that was going to happen, but I wasn't an important enough client that they let me in on that. So think about that misperception and the implications for that. So Paula assumes you have knowledge about what's going to happen in investments in the markets, but for some reason you don't think she's an important enough client that you would let her know in advance. This goes back to the importance of focusing on financial literacy. And I know as subject matter experts that have spent a lot of time in our field, sometimes those, tried and true basic financial literacy messages can appear kind of old to us, but it makes them no less important to our clients. Stressing to Paula that the reason you have a financial plan is so that you can ensure she's going to reach her family's goals and objectives regardless of market conditions, right? Helping her understand that's built into the plan. And also recognizing, Paula might want to talk about very different things than her partner. And I've heard from some financial professionals, sometimes with some couples, they'll say, hey, I have 2 different meetings because we're talking about 2 different things. Paula oftentimes feels the third wheel in the conversations between herself, her partner, and her financial professional. So you've got to find ways to get her more involved. And then I know we're starting to run out of time. I'll just give you a couple of key ways that women's, investment decision-making role in the household can translate to different ways that you're interacting with your clients. When it comes to investment expertise, all of you talk about investments, I'm sure, at some point. Carla is like any other household CFO. She wants the details. She wants to understand, whether performance is up or down, the why behind it. Nicole is less focused on investments and financial market performance. She wants to understand the impact to her family. So if the market goes down, are they going to have to adjust their, retirement date, for example? Paula, we talked about Paula's misperceptions on how financial markets work. It's so important in times of market volatility to reiterate those basic investment principles. And then last but not least, in terms of decision-making guidance, you can see Carla. So Carla wants to go be an active participant in those investment and financial planning decisions with you. She wants to understand all the options and be a partner with you in making the decision that's right for her. Nicole says, maybe you could narrow down our options to 1 or 2, but she's really looking for you to guide her. If you gave Paula the options that you gave Carla, Paula would be frustrated with you, right? Paula says, hey, I hired you to be the expert. I want you to tell me what the right decision is. So how do you connect that delegator client? One way is to focus on goal setting. You think about how our industry has evolved from a focus on investments to comprehensive wealth management. Comprehensive financial planning is a way to connect with the delegator. We actually have a separate program called Visualize Retirement. And what was really interesting with the group that were of Paula, they talked a lot about anxiety around the non-financial aspects of retirement, right? We've all seen those grain of divorce articles. So our Visualize Retirement program actually is a workbook that goes through, who are you going to spend your time with in retirement? What are you going to spend your time on? Where are you going to live? It talks about healthcare. Who might you be responsible for healthcare and who might help you with healthcare in retirement? So it goes through all the non-financial aspects. That can be a great way to connect with those delegator clients. And so before we go into questions in the Q&A, and remember you can type any questions in the chat, I'll just share with you, again, a couple of steps you can take to deepen relationships. So with your women clients, what I would suggest is focus on just a few top women clients to start. So maybe you have some top clients, you have a great relationship with that household CFO who happens to be a man. You see an opportunity to better connect with the women. Think about their personas, whether they're the Carla, the Nicole, or the Paula, and maybe tailor your next engagement. And remember, trust is something women value. How can you start to build that trust of your women clients, whether it be through learning opportunities, learning more about how you can serve them better, helping them learn more about investing and finance, and then being clear and setting clear expectations with regards to communications. Feel free to reach out to your T.Rowe Price representative. I know Bridget's on the line, and it may be another T.Rowe Price representative, but if you wanted to try that virtual feedback session, what a unique way to engage your clients right now. Or hold that seminar, Finding and Funding Your Why for Women. That was one thing we heard a lot with particularly the women that are the non-household CFOs. Again, that third wheel syndrome. They said, oh, I'd feel more comfortable if I was with like a group of women who were in that similar situation that I am in. And then last but not least, you're welcome to use our resources and promote your women clients to become financial mentors to young people in their lives. So with that, I think we'll see if there's any questions from the group.
We just had one sneak in as you were wrapping up right there. So Pedro's asking, from your survey, did you find any differences among different ethnicities? And can you highlight some if there were any?
All right. Well, Pedro, you actually are setting me up for a program that we are launching in January. So in this survey that just focused on women investors, we did not have enough sample size to look at different ethnicities, but we actually just did a new program. It's called Next Wave of Wealth. And we ensured that we had an adequate sample size to look at different groups. We looked at African American, Latinx or Hispanic, Asian, and we looked at LGBTQ. That was another group, a subgroup that we looked at. And in terms of ethnicity, so this is a little bit different because this isn't women. This survey was to looked at investors under 50, regardless of gender. I would say in terms of trust, if you looked at Asian Americans that were in our survey, I would say they were they had the least trust in the financial services industry, and they were concerned about getting the appropriate value for the services if they worked with a financial professional. When we looked at African Americans, one of the things that we saw with African Americans was this increase in focus on an emergency fund, and even though these were high earners, I forgot to tell you, this is top 10% of earners. So there was a lot of kind of like similar to the security needs. We think African Americans think about their finances a little bit differently. They want to have more of kind of a secure foundation, more of that larger emergency fund. And then when we looked at Hispanic or Latinx investors, there's a different nuance there, because when they're thinking about their financial plan, they're not just necessarily thinking about their household. So we saw with Hispanic and Latinx investors, their financial plan encompassed their family, which could be family members that don't necessarily live in their household. Maybe they live in a different country. So there's a little bit of different nuances on that. And that's a whole nother hour program that I could talk to you, but hopefully that helps. And we're happy to share that content with you when it becomes available in January.
Okay, other folks, if you've got a question, go ahead and type it in the chat. I have one. So switching from working with existing clients to finding new ones, do you have any ideas that you can share for prospecting, finding new women clients? Yeah.
So one idea that I would suggest, and one trend that we've seen a lot with large companies, especially Fortune 500, but any large companies, we're starting to see, I shouldn't say we're starting to see, most large companies have developed diversity and inclusion groups for their associate base. So at T.Rowe Price, we have a group called Mosaic, which is for the ethnically diverse individuals, and then we have a group called WAVE, which is for women associates. As a member of WAVE, I'm a member of several of the committees in WAVE. We're always looking for good speakers. So think about your clients that work in a large company in the cities that you work in, and maybe ask them, hey, do you guys have a women's group? I'm thinking of focusing on women investors. I want to serve them more. You could use that Finding and Funding Your Why seminar that I suggested. And we have a full seminar with speaker notes. We're happy to share it with you to position yourself, as an advocate for women, and that you understand the unique financial issues that women face. Again, I believe women are underserved in the financial industry. So if you can signal, again, that you're an ally or an advocate, I sincerely believe that you can grow your business.
Interesting ideas. I know some of our folks who are part of our Challenging Perceptions initiative are on this webinar today. So I'm wondering, guys, if that's something we might want to consider here at CFA Minnesota at some point. Anyway, other questions? And the awkward silence persists. All right, I've got one more that came to me in advance. I know, Jean, you shared a couple of ways that folks can connect with women clients in this virtual environment. I'm just wondering if you reached deeper into your bag of tricks. Do you have any other suggestions, knowing that it's still going to be a while before we can see each other in person?
Yeah, I do have one idea, and this actually came from a financial planner that I've known for a long time, and she shared with me, over the last, it's been 10, 11 months, she's been thinking about her approach, especially to her top clients, a little differently. So, pre-pandemic, she's got those calendar reminders where she reaches out, and she said, oftentimes I'm talking to just one partner in the household, right? The household CFO. And she said, this year I started to do 2 calendar reminders. So I reach out to the household CFO, I have that conversation. A few weeks later, another calendar reminder pops up, and it's to connect out with that partner who oftentimes isn't the household CFO. And she said, sometimes that can be an awkward conversation because I don't even have the partner's cell phone number or contact information. So I'm reaching back out to the household CFO and saying, and let's say you were trying to reach out to me. I was the non-household CFO. And so this financial planner said she's calling the household CFO and saying, hey, I was hoping to speak to Jean. And, the household CFO says, what do you have to talk to Jean for? We just had a conversation. Everything's good. She said, at that point, I say to that household CFO, the events of the last 12 months have made me realize how important it is that I have a good relationship with all of the family members of the families that I'm working with. It's not enough that you and I talked. I want to make sure that, for any reason, if Jean needs to reach out to me, she feels comfortable doing so. She has my contact information. So I'm trying to make a special effort to contact both partners during this time. And let's say she gets my cell phone number, she calls me. It's not that same conversation she has with the household CFO. She said, I usually open with, hey, Jean, I was thinking about you and your family during this difficult time, and I just wanted to see how you're doing. So again, a quick way that you could potentially make those stronger connections with those women clients who might happen not to be household CFOs. So thank you so much, Mark. I know we're running out on time.
And thanks right back at you, Jean. This has been another marvelous session, and some really good food for thought in all of this. So thank you so much for sharing your time today, and thank you to T.Rowe Price for making you available. As I've told people throughout my career, we can't do this stuff that we do without you guys. So we really appreciate your support. So. And with that, I will let all of you get back to your day and figure out what you're going to apply from today's professional learning experience. So thank you so much once again. Stay tuned, and if we don't see you or get to talk to you virtually in the next couple of weeks, please have wonderful holidays. Take care.